Plato's famous line, and even more famous, allegory of the cave. Now, according to Plato, there are lovers of opinion and lovers of wisdom. And of course, philosophy means love of wisdom, and so it would be clear which group he comes in agreement with. So for him, the true philosophers love the vision of truth. Now he talks about the one and the many in making his case. Beauty is the opposite of ugliness, and he infers from this that since beauty is the opposite of ugliness, they are two, and draws the inference that being two, each is one. And he does this for the same bit of reasoning for all things and their opposite. So just and unjust are two, so each is one. Good and evil are two, so each is one. Beauty and ugliness are two, so they each are one, etc. And combining them together, along with actions, they appear many. So essentially presenting a combination view of how this all works. So particular entities are a blend of a quality and its opposite. Now, the lovers of the lovers of wisdom, the philosophers, love these forms. But what about the lovers of opinion? So he also calls these the lovers of sounds and sights. And they're fond of tones, color, forms, not Plato's forms, and artificial products made from them. So essentially, I guess, consumers, we'd say today. And he asserts that their minds cannot see or love absolute beauty. They are living like in a dream, because, as he sees it, if a person believes in beautiful things, but does not believe in absolute beauty, they are living a life like a dream. And he says whether one is asleep or awake, it's dreamlike to mistake the image for the real thing. So what then is it to be awake? Well, one is awake when one recognizes the existence of absolute beauty. In other words, you're awake if you accept Plato's view. You're also awake if you're able to distinguish the idea from the objects, or the form rather, because Plato uses the term idea, but also is the same term used for form. So if we can distinguish the form from the objects which participate in that form, and also one is awake if one does not put the objects in the place of the forms, nor the form in the place of the objects. And so the mind of one who knows has knowledge, the other has the opinion. And so roughly put, if you agree with Plato, you have knowledge, and if you don't, you have mere opinion. Plato advances multiple arguments in support of his position. The first one is the being and non-being argument for the distinction. And here's how the argument goes. First, according to Plato, if you have knowledge, you know something, which seems reasonable. He asserts that absolute being can be absolutely known, but the utterly non-existent is utterly unknown. And that, of course, is more controversial. His next premise is that if anything can be and not be, kind of a Hamlet thing, to be or not to be, except it's both, it will be between pure being and absolute negation of being. Basically between being and not being, existing and not existing. And so he asserts that because of this, his conclusion is that knowledge corresponds to being and ignorance corresponds to not being. Naturally, this can all be disputed. The first one does seem reasonable. If you know something, and ignorance is knowing nothing. But of course, the rest of it could be argued. His next argument is the spheres and faculties argument for the distinction he draws between lovers of sight and lovers of wisdom, those of opinion and those who have knowledge. He asserts that the faculties, such as sight and hearing, are powers that we have, which we use to do things, and that seems reasonable. Then he asserts that what is the same sphere and the same result would be the same faculty, and what is another sphere and another result would be different. And this seems reasonable. For example, the way we distinguish, say, the faculty of sight and the faculty of hearing is that we see visible things and we hear audible things. And so the faculty of vision has the same sphere and the same result. So vision is vision. Now, and if they're different, of course, they would not be the same. So again, we see objects out in the world, and we don't really see colors, but I'll use that as a popular version. We see objects and we see color up there, but we don't hear color. We hear sounds. Although there are some interesting cases where people do, because of some interesting neurological factors, they do see sounds and hear colors, and it's some interesting stuff. But in general, when things are working, typically the faculties have different objects. And so he contends that since knowledge and opinion are both faculties, but they're not the same because they have different spheres and different results. So not the same thing. Pushing onward in the same argument, knowledge and opinion have distinct powers and distinct spheres, distinct subject matters. So how does he make the case for that? Well, for him, as he argued in the previous argument, being is the sphere of knowledge. And for Plato, knowledge is to know the nature of being. And opinion, of course, is to have an opinion. So, putting it all together, if we accept that a difference in faculty implies a difference in the sphere, and if opinion and knowledge are distinct faculties, then the sphere of knowledge and of opinion cannot be the same. And so we conclude they are different. And again, his objective here, going back to the beginning of Plato talking about his epistemology, is to try to show that knowledge is not merely having a true opinion. He wants to show these are different faculties, different things. So what is the subject matter of opinion? Well, for Plato, not being, and there's a lot of too many knots in here, but not being is not the subject matter of opinion. And why? Well, as Plato says, if you have an opinion, you've got an opinion about something. You can't have an opinion about nothing, or so he claims. And again, we can see here something we saw in earlier discussions about the problem of nothing, because we can talk about nothing, or can we? But anyways, if you have an opinion, you have an opinion about one thing. A single opinion is opinion about one thing, whatever that might be, like whether a particular movie is good or bad, or whether a certain baseball player has a particular batting average, or whether a particular candidate is a better choice for office or not. So not being is not one thing, but nothing. So he concludes that the subject matter of opinion is not nothing. Continuing, what is opinion going to be? Well, he takes opinion to be an intermediate. Why? Well, his argument is as follows. And he argues a lot, because that's what Plato does, and philosophers do in general. So ignorance for him correlates with not being, with nothing. And the correlative of being, according to him, is knowledge. So opinion is not concerned with being or not being. So it's not ignorance, because it's not about nothing, and it's not knowledge, because it's not about, on Plato's view, being. So it's an intermediate. So its correlative is and is not at the same time, and is between pure being and absolute not being. So it's in a middle ground between nothing and, for Plato, on Plato's view, these forms, these perfect entities. And so it's got a corresponding faculty that is not knowledge, because that deals with the forms, according to Plato, and is not ignorance, because that deals with nothing, because ignorance means one knows nothing, but corresponds to opinion, as he sees it. So the objects of opinion have this mixed quality. And these are the objects here in the sensible world. Not sensible in terms of like making good decisions, but sensible as in able to be sensed, can be seen, can be heard, etc. Now in this world of imperfection, things that are beautiful will on certain views be found ugly, and the same for other things. Think, for example, about people's disputes over whether a particular person is attractive or not, and not everyone agrees. Similarly, if we talk about like whether a ruling in court is just or unjust, people will clearly disagree. And one reason for this, according to Plato, is that the ideas of the many, of most people, about the beautiful and all other things are halfway between pure being and pure not being. So things in the world are mixed, and if someone only has notions about the things here, then it will be ideas, beliefs about things that are halfway. And these for Plato, since it's not true beauty or true justice, but it's not nothing, this will be a matter of opinion, but not knowledge. So, these lovers of opinion versus the lovers of wisdom. And again, Plato's a philosopher. The philosophy means love of wisdom, so clear which side he accepts. So the people, according to Plato, who have opinion but lack knowledge, will see the many beautiful things. If you ask them, is so-and-so beautiful? They'll say yes or no. If you ask them, is this painting beautiful? They'll say yes or no. So they see all the beautiful or not beautiful paintings and people and sunsets and flowers. But according to Plato, since they only have opinion, they don't see absolute beauty. Likewise for justice. They'll see many things they think of as being just. They'll see various, say, court rulings and decisions and behavior and judgments, but they will not see absolute justice. And the same goes for all the things that there are forms for. So they would be lovers of opinion rather than lovers of wisdom. In contrast, those who see the absolute, eternal and immutable, that is to say, Plato's forms, would have knowledge and not mere opinion. And so those who love the truth are lovers of wisdom and not lovers of opinion. So, what are these objects of knowledge? And this is where we've seen all along through here how Plato's metaphysics really sort of smushes into his epistemology. It's kind of a peanut butter cup scenario where you have your, two great tastes that go great together type of deal. And for Plato, these are, he makes a distinction between metaphysics and epistemology, but of course they're pretty well smushed together. So when it comes to the many and the one, there are many beautiful and many good things. And so Plato says, for all things we can describe. And these are the many. But Plato in his metaphysics holds that there is an absolute beauty, an absolute good. For all the things that there is a many of, justice, beauty, humans, cats, dogs, kiwis, there is a absolute according to him. They are grouped under a single form, the essence of each of these. So the many are seen. People see like cats and dogs and kiwis and so forth. But according to Plato and his epistemology, these are not known. Again, not in the informal sense we talk about like I know where my keys are, or I know this or I know that, but in the strict sense. And so the forms for him are known, but you don't see them. And being a philosopher, of course, he loves analogies. So he begins with an eye analogy. In moonlight and starlight, the eyes see dimly, but in the sunshine, the eyes see clearly because things are well lit. And so he says the soul is like the eye. When resting on what truth and being shine, the soul perceives, understands, and has intelligence. But when it turns back to the world of twilight, the world of becoming and perishing and change, this world, then the soul only has opinion and seems to lack intelligence. And this analogy, of course, also involves the sun. Plato really likes the sun analogy and the eye analogy, uses them quite a bit. Now for him, what imparts truth to the known and the power of knowing to the knower is the idea of good. And this has all sorts of functions in Plato's metaphysics and epistemology, because he does believe in the good, the form of the good. So there is objective good for him, as opposed to if you happen to have taken the class in ethics or interested in ethics, there's a considerable debate about whether morality is objective, subjective, relative, absolute, etc. And Plato, with this notion of a metaphysical good, clearly comes down on the view that goodness is an objective thing with metaphysical reality. In fact, for him, it's the realest of the real. Continuing this analogy, light and sight are like the sun, but not the sun. So science and truth for him are like the good, but they're not the good. And as I noted, the good has a higher place of honor. So what then is the good? Now, many philosophers, going way back and also way ahead to today, have contended that pleasure is the good. Aristotle argued against this. John Stuart Mill, centuries later, argues for this. But Plato rejects this view, that pleasure is not the good. And this is a point of dispute in ethics about what is the good. Now for Plato, continuing the analogy more, in this physical world, the sun is the cause of visibility. It enables us to see, laying aside, fire and stuff. Also the cause of generation, nourishment, and growth. And so Plato realized the sun was, really important. But the sun itself, of course, is not visibility, not generation, not growth. In a like manner, continuing the analogy, the good is the author of knowledge, to all things known, and of their being and essence. The good is not essence for him, but far exceeds essence in dignity and power. Now, this reference to the sun, or the good revealing things like the light of the sun, leads to an enduring metaphor about enlightenment, about seeing things. And of course, when we'll see more examples of this in the future, when people draw cartoons and they want to show a character getting an idea, they draw a light bulb. And part of this comes from the philosophical notion of how the light of goodness shines on things, and it's a metaphor people still use to this day. Now, as we'll see when we talk more about Plato's metaphysics and epistemology, working out how this metaphor actually works becomes problematic, because when people talk about enlightenment or seeing the truth, the challenge is cashing that all out, providing some proof. Next, we'll take a look at the famous line, and then in the future we'll press on to the even more famous allegory of the cave.